Hi, welcome back to the Gando Tech Learning channel. Today we're going to start another exciting video in terms of app settings and environment variables within the C Sharp. So as part of this video, we are talking about what is actually the environment variables and what is app settings in the C Sharp. And then we're gonna have a walkthrough how to implement an app settings in C Sharp and how to map your app setting in your object to have a appropriate object and easily access to the values without keep touching the app settings, and also how to inject environment variables to overwrite your app setting values. And So it's going to be two different scenarios, which one of them is a shortcut of just mocking the environment variables inside the Visual Studio. And then the second scenario, which is the actual using the actual Windows basically variables. We're going to go there, create the environment variables, and then run it in Visual Studio to see how it's working. So please bear with me. We're gonna start this exciting video and talking about these fundamental and crucial things as part of this video. So, um, uh, uh, what basically we're going to talk about is so the first thing actually. Let me go back to my basically agenda again. So as you can see, what we are going to talk about firstly is about the environment variables. So actually, what is the environment variables? So I'm sure most of you are aware of basically this concept inside the Windows. And so the environment variables actually has been introduced to basically give the users this ability to introduce the different environment variables for their applications, and also um, even for example, whenever you want to inject some of the configurations which could be basically changed, and it should be flexible based on what users need and what users machines configurations, and it's up to the user. Then the, there is a ability that which basically you can inject your information and user information into the application, and application will be act basically accordingly. So to access these environment variables, just easily go to start menu and type environment variables. That basically system property uh, basically will come up, and then as part of these system properties you just need to click on environment variables. Then you would be able to see the actual windows of environment variables. As part of this page, you would have two sections. The first section is user variable, the other section is system variable. So the first question comes to your mind is, what's the difference between them? Why we have these things? So in both of them, you would be able to introduce your environment variables, and they are acting almost the same. The only major difference between these two is Windows gives you that ability to say, okay, if you want to run your application based on certain users which who are going to log into to this machine, then you have to introduce your environment variables inside the user variable. So this user variable list will be populated based on the user who already logged into this machine, and it will basically load all of them in here. And the system variable is loading whole system, whole variables, environment variables, which are shared across this machine, not based on the user. So it's regardless of the user. So it then, what does it mean? It means it will be shared between all users are going to log into this machine. So whoever log into this machine would be able to see the system variables, but it's only would be able to see its own basically variables as well, which has been introduced for it. So this is the only difference between the user variables and the system variables. So if I want to make it much more easier for you to understand, Visual Studio will see basically all these two lists as one list. Once it's coming to list them and use them. So whatever basically whenever your application is going to read the environment variable, it will read all of them and then is start using them. So in either one, you can introduce your environment variables. It doesn't matter. But Visual Studio or your application will see those user variables for that specific user who is basically logged into this machine. That's it. But if you share it in here in the system variable, any user log into to this machine would be able to see them and used if basically they have got that application. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything which is required you to know about the environment variables. The second basically talk is what is app setting in C Sharp. So app setting is a JSON format file as part of your project. So the actual app setting mostly being used by console application like this. But the whole concept of having these sort of settings, either you use the web API or web application, whatever you use, this concept of having a JSON format as a configuration file and use it inside your application or project would remain the same. It's just sake of having different names. That's it. So uh, as part of this configuration file, it's better to just call it like this. As part of this configuration file, you would have a JSON format, which is basically structured as you need. So that's it. The only difference between the console application app setting and the basically launch basically settings within the API or your web applications is they have got some pre-populated values inside the settings as well, which is being used by your project. But by the way, you can easily manipulate it, remove some or add some into the setting file as basically you require or you need them. So just feel free to touch it as you need. So as you can see, I have just provided an example of basically what I'm going to use in my actual project. And as you can see, it's purely a JSON format. It has got the name and it has got basically some nested values, nested basically field name and values. So as part of the example which I'm going to do, I always in my videos try to make it more basically real and whatever you basically will face in reality in real companies in the commercial market. So if I want to give you a hint or background about what does it mean in terms of source and destination, this is a notion of having like your application is going, this is a story, I'm going to just give it more meaningful basically sense to basically to for you to be able to communicate with that basically a story. So that whatever basically what's basically behind this story is, so your application is going to communicate with the two different individual third parties as a source and destination applications, and your application is pretending to go and basically um, fetch the data from the source and then do some calculation or apply some functionalities, run some process, and then give it to the basically destination. But this is just pretending. This application is nothing to do with all these things, because the concern of this video is to just tell you how to implement the app settings, how to fetch it, how to use it. That's it. So we don't basically mind about the actual things. This is just a simple story to give it a sense, okay, why we are using this basically app setting and why we are using the source and destination. It could be anything. As I said, it's completely up to your project. So for instance, I've got source and destination, so I just categorize my setting to source and destination to make it more basically organized. And then each source and basically product has got the flag to basically make it enable or disable, switch it on and off, and it has got the URL as well. So in here, I just put the fundamental basically flags, but you can they could be different. They could have more configuration, and it's not the same as you have in source and destination. So this is based on the needs of those applications. So it could have more fields here, more properties here, or less. And even in terms of the count of the number of the field, the flags, they are not necessarily the same. It's up to those individual projects which you are going to communicate. I just put an example for you to basically make it more meaningful. So the is enable for example, this app setting is true, which is saying, okay, this source is enabled, and this is the URL which is going to communicate with them. And this is the destination again, it's enabled, and also this is the URL. That's all. So now I'm going to basically take you a tour, amazing and interesting tour to show you how to implement this app setting. So bear with me. Nice. So as you can see, we have got our basically created solution, and I'm going to show you how to implement this. So this is a simple, pure, empty console applications. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm going to the first thing I'm going to do is to create the app setting file, and then um, I will use my um, what's the name? I will use my configuration in there. So what I'm gonna do, if I can search based on the JSON, so I'm gonna create a JSON file. I will name it app settings. Okay, the naming is correct. Amazing. So I got my app settings now. So to just basically saving the time, I'm going to just basically copy and paste the current app setting which I have got. It's just easily, it's just a JSON format. So as you know how to implement the JSON format, then you can easily put whatever you want. So as I said, you can have different apps, different values as you wish. It's up to you. Like, I don't know, um, mm, has published, like yes or no. You know, you can add as basically as much as you require in your JSON format. So this is totally up to you. Okay, nice. So we have got our app settings in place now. Just basically um, to basically make it much more easier. I'm gonna change something in this app settings file, um, because I don't wanna basically um, goes to those hassles of uh, communicating with the file and these sort of things once you run the applications. So I'm gonna just basically change the property for this and say whenever you build this application on you run or you run these applications, please create a copy of the app setting into my into my exe folder. So whenever you run the application, whenever you build the application, automatically it will check the app setting if there is any changes, or if it's not exist inside the build folder exactly beside your exe file, then it will go and copy one copy of this app setting in there. And in this case, you don't need to go through the padding and these sort of things. Just straight away access to the app setting and use it. So copy if new year. That's it. So then whenever you run the application, you can easily access to your app settings. So now, as I said, we are going to, so you can basically by some lines you can easily access to your app settings and each field and just use them. But this is an old-fashioned thing, and nowadays, based on basically mapping and deserializing system, you can easily basically deserialize your values, which is in the JSON file, into the appropriate object and just use it. So for this basically case, what I'm going to do, a, um, I'm going to create a class and just name it as a app settings. And what I'm going to do in this class, I'm going to introduce my objects in there, and the objects would be the same as what you already named them here. Yeah, I want to give you a tip here, because this project which I'm going to create for you is not a simple, straightforward project. So I put some sort of challenges in there, and as you can see, we are not using the linear uh, configurations in there. What I'm talking about is, let's say you don't have any naming or as a parents in there and then put the children here. I'm talking about something like having the fields like this. So there is no parent. It's just linear and just list them as a in the root, which is the simplest way of the introducing the app setting. But it's not a well organized and best practice of creating the app setting. So it's better to always have some sort of categorization in terms of how to introduce the flags to just accessibility, easier accessibility, having everything organized. Once you go to each section, you know what you're gonna do and what is belong to what. So that's why I've created this basically parent-child or nested actually app settings. So for the case of having like this, it's not just easily introducing the app settings and put the values there. So you have to basically follow the structure. So as you can see, we have two parents here as a root, and then inside each parent we have got these fields. So for this specific scenario, as you can see, we have same field names for each category, and each category basically are based on the source and destination. So I just basically create another class, and what I'm gonna do is put something like sub or uh, settings details, and just name it like this. So as part of these sub details, so if you want to basically have a quick look to the app setting, we would say, okay, these details going to be these two. And as far as they are the same, so we can just put all of them in one class. So I'm going to introduce public, and we're gonna what we're gonna do, we're gonna just create um, a boolean for is enabled, and it's going to be get set, and that's it. So I'm going to create the second one as a string and name it URL as we have it in the string file. So this basically class is going to having a notion of these two fields as a child field. And then, as you can see, now we have got two objects which are accessing to these basically two properties. So as part of the app setting, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna create two properties. One of them is um, source, and the type is settings details. So this is what exactly we're gonna have as part of our class. So it's going to be exactly the same thing for destination. So as you can see, uh, it's now basically show you how it's well organized. Um, so the app settings object or model now, it's completely sync with what we have in the app settings here. So this is the basic thing which basically we require to introduce firstly before starting the implementation. So we have app settings. This app setting has got two properties, source and destination, as we have in the actual app setting JSON file. And uh, as part of each source and destination, we have got a subclass which is introducing is enabled and URL. And as you can see, we have got these children here. So now the next step is going and introduce and using this object inside the program CS or in your application. Simple as that. In your application, wherever you need to use the app setting. But normally, the best practice is always whenever you run your application, either is a web or Windows or console application, whatever it is, the best practice is to populate all your app settings at the beginning of the project. If it's a web or web API in your startup, if it's here in your program file, as soon as you run your application, firstly you fetch your app settings, because these app settings are containing the fundamental flags which is configuring your application based on the need. And it's really important to have all of them at the beginning and then go through each section of your application or functionality based on them. Simple as that. So now what we're gonna do, we're gonna basically as we are using the .NET Core, so we're gonna basically use some sort of simple things, a couple of lines to have your app setting populated and ready for basically work. So I'm just gonna use the required line here and then just yes. So uh, okay, so now what we're gonna do, we're gonna need sort of what's the name, sort of NuGet packages or some sort of references to be able to actually use these things. So we have some NuGet packages which I'm going to suggest you to install them to be able to basically move forward and having everything. So as far as you are running the configuration builders, sort of basically using the JSON file and serializations, and also having the in the next step, which is basically using the environment variables as a second step of having basically the information from environment variable, also using the configuration builders, all these things. So we need to introduce some NuGet packages, which I'm going to install them at the beginning to just basically make the life easier. So one of the things you require to use actually is Microsoft extension configuration. So we are going to install this one. Okay, and now I'm going to just close this one, and program here. And then we have uh, system dot configuration manager. Yeah, this one. So we're gonna install this one as well. And then we need Microsoft. We are going to configuration JSON. Why? Because we basically have this as, so as part of our project, we are reading the app settings JSON, so we would be able to load it as a JSON and then map it as required. And then one of the other things is file extension here. We're going to install this one. And also we are going to have the environment variables for next step our job. And what else we need is going to be using a binder, because we are going to bind our basically data to our model, which is really important. And other things which is basically required is uh, we okay, so if we go now to the product, just to see, just uh, okay, the configuration builder, let me see. Okay, so now I'm going to just um, add it to my project, reference it to my project. So as you can see, now we have got the configuration as a configuration builder. And then the next step is we are going to add our appSettings.json file into the configuration builder, and then we build it as a configuration. So now we have access to the appSettings.json file. So the next step is to just creating our object and um, bind our configurations to just with our app settings, and then bingo, that's it. So now to just basically show you if we are getting the values from our app settings or not, I just put this line as a control to just write on the console and show you if our object has been basically bound to app setting, and we have got the data in our app setting object, which is our model is app settings here, and this is an instance of that app settings which populated by the data which is coming from configuration and app settings accordingly. So now, bingo, we have got everything implemented. And what I'm expecting is once I'm coming to the app settings here, I should be able to see everything um, in my object. So let's have a go and see what we got here. Nice, nice one. So as you can see, I just populated the source and destination, and the source is supposed to display the app settings source is enabled or not, and also the URL, and the destination the same. And as you can see, the source is enabled, and the URL is my source API URL. Let's have a look here if we have the same. Yes, is enabled is true, and the URL is my source API URL. And let's have a look to the destination. Destination is true, as you can see, and the URL is my destination API URL. Wow, exciting, exciting. So from now on, from this line 16 onward, now you can use your app settings. Let's have a look here to see how it looks like once you watch it. Let's have a go at the app setting, and as you can see is a type of app settings, and then destination and source are a type of string details. And if we go to details, yes, the URL and the enabled one, so both of them has been populated as we expected. So now as you can see, we have got everything in place. So just bear in your mind any changes in terms of the naming of the fields or adding new things, it should be sync with whatever you have in here in app setting and in your model. So they should be completely consistent and sync. Whatever you have here, you should have there as well. If you so The point is, if you have anything in your model and in your app settings, then they are going to be populated in there. If you miss it in your app setting, it just it just ignore it. If you have it in your app setting, and if you don't have it in your JSON file, then it just leave it as a null because there is nothing to be populated. So just bear in your mind about these basically things. So now, yes, so we have everything in our place at the moment. Any app settings is going to be populated. So you remember we just set the app settings basically to be copied in beside our exe file. So if I go to my folder and explore it, as you can see, if I go to the bin folder, debug, and my basically exe file here, as you can see, there is a copy of app setting in here, which you can easily um, use it. So whenever, so what it gives you, it just give you, okay, just copy these app files and put them wherever you want and just run the application. The same for um, API or whatever. So now, as you can see, we have everything in place. Um, 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 we have app setting is configured now. As soon as you run the application, you will have all the appropriate configuration in your app setting, and you can just easily use your app setting as we used it in this simple write line. So you can just use it, inject it anywhere, use it, whatever you want. It's absolutely up to you. So if just one thing, just make sure. I just left my sub details as a get and set together to because if you want to just fetch them from the your app setting file and you are not going to change it during the application, you can just basically use get for them. Simple as that. Just to give you, to make it read only whenever you use it across your project. So it's totally up to you. If you want to change it um, differently or from somewhere else, then you have to keep it basically writable. Okay, cool. So the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce something which is saying, okay, if mm, uh, if you have um, environment variables, so sometimes these app settings could come from the environment variables from your Windows. But apart from that, if you enable your project to support the environment variables, it gives you this ability, this basically flexibility to your project to accept any variables or environment variables from outside your project. For instance, your machine environment variables, the basic thing. Also, it could come from what's the name? Any, for example, you deployed your application on Kubernetes, on Docker, where the team city. So if you can easily inject these environment variables from your team city job, and in the team city job you can introduce it easily. For instance, okay, for example, enable my source in my basically systems because I have it. So easily from your Kubernetes or Docker, whenever you run the team city job, you can easily pass all those values down to your application. Simple as that. So these environment variables is happening once you do such a things, which is more popular now within the commercial market. So by adding this line, easily you enable your project for any environment variables. Okay, nice. So now you remember, so there is nothing else you want to touch. Simple as that in your code. So now, if you remember in my agenda, I mentioned as part of the walkthrough, we have two scenarios. Mocking the environment variable inside the Visual Studio. For now, you just don't want to get hassles and going to add environment variable set into the Windows, close and open your Visual Studio, those sort of things. So the easiest way to test them, just right click on your project, go to the properties, and then go to the debug, and bingo, you have got environment variables here. You can add environment variables here and just rerun the application. Simple as that. But there is a challenge here. That's why I put this nested the app settings for you guys. Why? Because once you have nested flags like this source and destination and they have children, then it's a bit different once you want to introduce your environment variable and inject it from this environment variable or team city job or other places. So there is a tweak here. So what you need to do, let's say I want to inject I want to disable my source from environment variable. Just click add, put your environment variable here and put false. Okay, just save it and just run it. So what I'm expecting is I'm expecting to see now source is false. And as you can see, my source is false now. Simple as that. So by this basically environment variable, you can easily basically change your values. And this is what exactly happening once you introduce the actual or real variables. Like I'm putting the URL. Um, mm, um, injected from EV, environment variable. And simple as that. Let's have a look. Okay, so now, as you can see, there is a there is a thing. Here is the thing. So as you can see, it hasn't basically taken the place. And also, the question is, we have same URL, same what's the name flag here. What if I wanna disable my destination? Then this enable or this URL, they are not going to work. So what that's here is the challenge actually. So in this situation, if you want to do it for destination, you have to change your flag like this. So what does it mean? It gives you that basically hint to say, okay, go to the destination and then go to the is enabled flag and then make it false. So let's have a look if to see what basically we have here. Okay, so I have to change something here, which is causing an issue for me. Bear with me. I'm just gonna delete them and do this. Just closing and opening my Visual Studio. Oh, sorry. So the issue was I had my environment variables there. So uh, I had my environment variables there. So that's why it was basically uh, taking effect from the actual environment variables. So I just removed them from there. And now let's have a look to this. Okay, we have got destination is enabled false. Now I'm going to run it. Bingo. So that's the result. So as you can see, the value is source is true or false, and the destination now is false. So what I'm going to do, I'm removing this one and just run it again to see what happened. Wow, look at that. That's here is the challenge. So that's the problem. Just bear in your mind, whenever basically you have the actual environment variables from your real Windows environment variables, it will take to the consideration from your Visual Studio, and it's overwrite everything in your local app settings. So as you can see, I put only is enabled, and it basically didn't change your values here, and it means uh, it cannot communicate with is enabled because is enabled is a sub field, sub flag. So you have to give the proper address to that to say, okay, go to the destination and then is enabled and then make it false. And now, as you can see, the destination is false. Or go to the source and then URL and put, oops, and put um, injected from EV. And now let's see what we got here. There it is. So as you can see, the source remained true, enabled, because it's not going to touch from, it's not going to be touched from outside environment variable, so it will keep and stick to the app settings. This one has been changed because as part of our environment variable, we mention basically the source URL should be this one, which is basically coming actually in reality from the actual environment variable, and the destination is false, and it overwritten your app settings destination is enabled to false, but the URL keep remain the same. So that's all. So now your basically your application has been enabled to accept the environment variables as well from anywhere. Anyone has got introduced these environment variables in your machine, in your Kubernetes, Docker, or wherever as a container, introduce this environment variable, your application will catch it and it will inject to your application, and your application will be acting like this. Simple as that. Simple as that. Okay. So now, um, what I'm gonna do, I'm going to the real, um, what's the name, environment, Windows environment variable, and put those environment variables there and just see how it goes. So to basically avoiding any basically confusion, I just remove them from here to just see if it's working now. As you can see, everything will coming from the actual app settings here. That's it. So just bear in your mind, uh, this process is happening based on the order. So at first is reading from app settings and take the stuff into consideration. If there is any environment variable in there, it will go and fetch them from there if they are available. If they are available, I'm just pushing this and emphasizing on this. If they are available, and then override them. So always the last one is going to be uh, final thing to be taken into the consideration. Just bear in your mind. Okay, so now I'm going to environment variables now, and uh, as I said, just go and type environment variables, and inside the environment variables, what you need to do, you just need to introduce your values in there. So I just put uh, source is enabled and then value false. Just type as we discussed and just do OK. OK. And now I'm going to stop my Visual Studio, rerun it again, and then let's have a look. And so let's make sure in the debug we don't have anything here. So I'm just going to run the application and see what's happening. There you go. So as you can see, the source has been basically has been affected by the environment, the actual environment variable, and the value now is false. So where the environment variable, we disabled our source completely. So it's not gonna work for us anymore until we just re-enable it again. So see, these are the things actually we are basically going to use as part of our app settings. So one more thing which is really popular, still popular at least in the normal servers, and also virtual servers as well. So, and here is the thing. Um, I'm sure you have seen such a app settings as well. Let's say you have such a app settings. Let me copy and paste this one. Copy and paste this app setting and just rename it to something like this one, app settings dot test or UAT or production or development. I'm sure you have seen such a things as well. And these app settings are part of your application, and based on the environment variable has been set up in your actual environment as a or as a test environment or UAT environment or production environment. You have this environment variable which is saying, okay, this environment is a test, and based on that your application will read it, and based on that value it will use either, for example, your test environment or your, let's say, uh, live environment. So let's say, for instance, I will say I'm using my test environment to be disabled, and to just make it more appropriate. So API, this one is production, live URL. I'm using the live URL. I'm using the, let's make this one true and just change this one to give more notion. So the app setting doesn't have any environment. The live has got a live URL and the test has got test URL. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to add one more line, which is in the basically normally used if you wanna um, get the variables from there. So you can easily introduce this environment variable. I'm just going to use it here. I'm not going to add it to the actual environment variable because it's going to be the same. We already seen that. And I put test here and save it. So now what's happening here is going to get the environment variable, which the name is this one. It could be anything, but this is a default basically ASP.NET Core variable. You can set it, but anyway, you can put anything here. You can just introduce it in your environment variable. So it will fetch it. If there is something, uh, I need to add one line here as well and just introduce that environment variable as a env. Just put the variable here to be synced with what we have here. So it will fetch the environment variable, the value from this environment variable, and then copy it here. If it's available, then it will be overwritten to your actual app setting. Otherwise, it will stick to the app setting and then go to the environment variable. If there is no environment variable, then again, it will take this one to consideration. So now I'm going to run it to see how it goes. Bingo. Excellent. So as you can see, your environment is test, so that's why it has run the test appsetting.test.json. This is first thing. Some of you have a question in your mind and say, oh, okay, the source is false, but in the app setting in test is true. So how did that happen? Obviously, because as I said, is following this order. In your add environment variable, if you remember, we already have is source is enabled false in our environment. So it says go to the test environment pick the configuration, set them, and then go to the environment variables, actual environment variables outside the application, and see if there is any of these fields or flags are there. Just put the value, grab the value, and overwrite in there. Simple as that. So all of this, you can feel how flexible is this basically environment variable and app settings across your application. Simple as that. So you can configure as flexible as you want. Simple as that. And that's it. So I think as part of this course, we have covered all the required information in terms of the environment variable and app settings. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. In the case of basically new videos coming through, you can be notified easily, and also support us basically in terms of um, uh, our channel, and please share our channel with others to basically to be able to watch these videos and improve their knowledge. And thank you very much for watching this video. We're gonna have more videos coming through soon, and please keep in touch. Thank you very much for watching.